Well, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Aotearoa tōku aho, ko Darryn tōku ingoa. I live in Aotearoa in Christchurch, and my name is Darryn. My mahi is being the streets chaplain around the city of Aotearoa. I find it's been an interesting endeavour to find the freedom to choose to select a passage for an evening prayer for Te Hāhi, Weteriana o Aotearoa. Interesting from the perspective that I may have read a passage often and it's become quite familiar to me, yet how I interact with it and it interacts with me and I interpret it and it interprets me can be very different depending upon the situation, what's happening around me at the time, and particularly the mood that I'm in. The reading that I've selected for this time of prayer and reflection that really flow in together is the reading from Psalm 137, verses 1 to 4. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked us for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How could we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And thanks to Boney M, the group from the 70s, for the recollection of this verse through the medium of song. I've selected the first 4 verses of Psalm 137, as the final verses are all about violence and destruction and really move away from the lament of the first 4 verses. There is movement in the psalm from what was known for the people living in the land of Zion, and then the grief to moving to another country as slaves, as captives, life changing on all levels, you might say. And it seems as though the Israelites were known for their singing. And for us as Methodists, we can relate to these ancient people, as we're also apparently known for our liking song as well. But how shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? The landscape is strange for us today, while we have a connection and maintain that connection to our whenua. The landscape, though, as a metaphor, is changing for us. It's only 2 years ago, really, that COVID came into our lives and now has changed our lives. So how can we sing the Lord's song in this strange land, as the virus is dictating to us as to how we live and what we will do? It's captivated us. You might even say it's captured us. What is the Lord's song for us in 21st century Aotearoa? As I mentioned earlier, my place of birth where I entered the world is Aotearoa. Fast forward some years later, I moved to Australia for around 19 years before returning, and I returned very differently from when I left. When I was there in 1991, I was there in order to undertake a year's course on theology at the then Churches of Christ Theological College in Melbourne. And I went there with a suitcase. And when I returned in 2010, I returned with a wife, 3 children, and a container. We arrived in January of 2010, before the fun started on September the 4th of that year. I said fun, however, the next 4 years were anything but fun. For 4 years, approximately, it seemed as though I was hypersensitive to sound. And that was because of the earthquakes. I would hear them coming before I felt them. And then the vibration of the earth was very unsettling. Then if I was with others and we experienced an earthquake or an aftershock together, we'd guesstimate as to what size it was on the Richter scale. At one point, I found myself what I'd say to be spiritually lost. I was the minister of a certain congregation, and while the church sustained some damage, it wasn't structural. I found myself saying to myself, what you might say, wrestling internally with the thought, with the question of, here I am, the minister of a congregation, and I'm supposed to have hope. But what is it that I'm supposed to have hope for? What am I to be hopeful for? And there's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty around at the time. And the question that would come up most often was, when will this end? When will this stop? This was a period of change for me in my life, as I still tend to look for exits when I go into a venue that's not familiar to me. The following year, in 2011, I attended a UCAN's conference, Uniting Congregations of Aotearoa, New Zealand, in Mochiwaka, in the Tasman district of Te Waipounamu, the South Island. And one of the speakers there happened to be a colleague of mine. And she spoke of the situation that she was in for her and her faith community and what they were facing, a very uncertain future. The building had been destroyed and the congregation had a temporary venue in which to meet. And they shifted around 4 times in 7 years. So it was a pretty tough time for them all. She mentioned the struggles, the practicalities of keeping the community together, and the grief at having to say goodbye to the church that has stood there for many years and served their community well. And now it's gone. She said words to the effect of, we're a community and will continue to be a community. This is our hope that God is in the midst of us. This doesn't change. And with these words or ones similar to it, I knew the message that was given was one that I needed to hear. My colleague represented for me, or actually articulated, what I'd been struggling to answer. Our hope is that despite the circumstances we're in our community, we are to be a community of hope. The church, throughout her history, has faced many challenges, both internal and external. From being exiled, schisms, what we call splits, wars, famine, poverty, unstable leadership, being on the right side of civil rights, and being relevant. The church has had to reimagine herself and her place within society, building upon the foundation of faith and hope. Now, while the landscape may seem familiar to us, it does change. We're using that as a metaphor anyway. So how do we sing the Lord's song in this land, this whenua that has changed for us? See, we're now faced with uncertainty as well. The 1 p.m. updates have become a regular part of our lives. We're informed as to how many new COVID cases there are. Masks are to be worn wherever we are. Gathering numbers are restricted. There's an option to be vaccinated or not. And this is causing some division between whānau and families and friends. And we have social distancing. How can we sing the Lord's song in this strange land that we find ourselves in? I guess we can look at it in two ways. Firstly, we can look at it from the perspective, from a negative perspective, that how can we sing as being an exasperation? We can't do this. We can't sing this song. We have nothing to sing about. Or it may be that we see it differently, and we use that how as a way of providing some action for us. How do we do this? How do we sing the Lord's song in this strange land? Now, not unlike the Israelites of the past who lamented their situation and found themselves in a very different place, unfamiliar to them, we as a church could find ourselves in a similar position to grieve what we need to leave behind and to look for hope in God. The song may be required to be redefined, but always have at its heart hope. With that hope, let us sing the Lord's song in this strange land together. Amen.